The restaurant was quiet in the early morning, with only a few regular customers scattered at the tables. The waitress moved quickly between them, carrying trays with careful balance, smiling politely, and making small talk that felt warm but practiced. She had been working in this restaurant for years, and everyone knew her as dependable and friendly, the kind of person who made customers feel at home without asking for much in return. But few people knew about her other life, the life she kept tucked away in the corners of her mind and behind the closed door of her small apartment. Her day began long before the restaurant opened. She would wake up early, before the sun had even risen, and prepare herself for the long hours ahead. There was always something to do: cleaning, organizing, making sure everything was ready for the rush that would come later. She dressed neatly, though simply, tying her hair back carefully so it would not fall into her face while she worked. There was a quiet discipline in the way she moved, a rhythm that matched her thoughts. It was not the life she had dreamed of, not exactly, but it was steady, and she was good at it. As she stepped into the restaurant, the familiar smells of coffee and baked bread greeted her. She smiled to herself, inhaling deeply, taking comfort in the normality of it all. The restaurant was small, cozy, with wooden tables and chairs that had been polished many times over the years. A piano sat in the corner, slightly worn but still elegant, its keys slightly yellowed with age. She often looked at it, touched it lightly with her fingers when no one was watching, and imagined the music she could make fill the room. Music had always been her first love. From the time she was a child, she had been drawn to the piano. Her parents could not afford lessons, but she had learned in small ways, watching videos, listening carefully, and practicing on an old keyboard she had saved up to buy. Her fingers had grown used to the feel of the keys, and over time, she developed a natural sense of rhythm and melody. But life had a way of putting her dreams aside. Responsibilities grew, bills piled up, and music became something she practiced only when the apartment was quiet and her mind needed an escape. She started her shift by checking the tables, arranging utensils, and preparing the small notepads she used to take orders. The restaurant would soon fill, and she liked to have everything ready so she could move swiftly without stumbling over anything. Her co-workers, some younger and full of energy, some older and a little tired, greeted her as she passed. They knew she was reliable, the one they could count on to handle a sudden rush or a difficult customer without losing her cool. The first customers arrived slowly. A man with a newspaper, a woman sipping coffee while scrolling on her phone. She took their orders, smiled politely, and moved back to the counter to prepare drinks. There was a quiet satisfaction in this routine, even if it was exhausting. She liked the rhythm of her work, the rise and fall of activity, the chance to interact with people, the small victories of a satisfied smile or a kind word. But beneath it all, there was always a longing for something more, something that could make her feel truly alive. Sometimes, when the restaurant was quiet, she would glance toward the piano. The keys seemed to call to her in a way nothing else could. She imagined her fingers dancing across them, producing music that could make people stop and listen. She had done this before in her small apartment, playing to an empty room or to the night that listened patiently outside her window. The sound would echo softly in her heart, filling her with a warmth that nothing else could. But here, in the restaurant, she had never dared. Customers came to eat and drink, not to listen to someone play. And besides, who would notice her music? She was just a waitress, after all. As the morning passed, the restaurant began to fill. Families came in with children laughing and running between the tables, couples talked quietly, and a few regulars nodded to her as she passed by. She served them all with her usual grace, taking orders, pouring drinks, and carrying trays with careful balance. Her hands moved quickly and efficiently, but her mind often wandered back to the piano. She thought of the songs she could play, the way the notes could rise and fall like waves, and the feeling of connection it could bring. Music had always been her secret companion, the one thing that made her feel seen even when no one else noticed. During a brief break, she leaned against the counter and allowed herself a moment to breathe. She watched the sunlight streaming through the windows, dust particles dancing in the golden light. It reminded her of quiet mornings at home, when she would sit at her small keyboard and play until her fingers ached and her heart felt full. She smiled faintly, thinking how strange it was that something so simple could bring such joy. In those moments, she felt a sense of freedom she rarely experienced in the structured, demanding world of the restaurant. The lunch crowd began to arrive. The restaurant grew louder, filled with the clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversation, and the occasional laughter of children. She moved between the tables, taking orders and serving food, keeping a careful eye on everything. There was a rhythm to her work, a way she could anticipate needs before they were spoken, and she took pride in it. But even in the busiest moments, the piano in the corner remained in her mind, a silent promise of something more. Her coworkers noticed her glances toward the piano and teased her lightly, joking that she should play a song for the customers. She laughed along with them but felt a flutter of longing in her chest. What would it be like to actually play here, in front of people, to let her music be heard outside her private world? The thought scared her and excited her at the same time. She had never performed for anyone outside her home. The idea of doing so in a restaurant full of strangers was both thrilling and terrifying. As the day wore on, a few familiar faces arrived. A couple that came every week, a man who liked to sit at the corner table and read, and a few new faces she did not recognize. One of them, a well-dressed man with an air of confidence, caught her attention. He looked around the restaurant with interest, as if noticing everything, and when his eyes landed on the piano, a smile crossed his face. He seemed curious, and something in his gaze made her heart beat a little faster. She quickly turned back to her work, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness she could not explain. Despite the busy hours, there were moments of calm when she could pause, refill water glasses, or clear a table. In those moments, she let her mind wander to the music she loved. She imagined her fingers gliding across the piano keys, the sound filling the room, and people turning to listen. She imagined the surprise and delight on their faces, the way music could make even a brief moment feel special. For a moment, she felt lighter, as if she could escape the daily grind and step into a world where her talent was not hidden. Even as she worked, she kept thinking about the piano. It was more than an object in the corner. It was a symbol of everything she hoped for but rarely allowed herself to pursue. She thought of the hours she had spent practicing alone, the songs she had learned, and the small victories that no one else had ever seen. Music had been her secret world, her companion in quiet moments, and the thought of sharing it, even for a little while, filled her with a mixture of fear and hope. By late afternoon, the restaurant began to empty, the rush of the day giving way to a quieter, more relaxed atmosphere. She wiped down the tables, arranged chairs, and prepared for the evening crowd. As she moved around, she kept glancing toward the piano, imagining what it would be like to play just one song, to let her fingers tell a story that words could not. She felt a small, persistent voice in her heart urging her to take a risk, to step outside her comfort zone and see what might happen. She did not yet know that her opportunity would come sooner than she expected. But for now, she continued her work, carrying trays, smiling at customers, and moving with practiced efficiency. She balanced her daily responsibilities with the quiet longing in her heart, the music that waited patiently for its moment. In the rhythm of her day, there was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something unexpected, something life-changing, might happen at any moment. The waitress ended her shift for a short break, sitting briefly at the counter and sipping a glass of water. She allowed herself a deep breath and let her mind wander back to the piano. She remembered the first song she had learned as a child, the joy of discovering the sound of the keys, and the way music had always made her feel alive. She thought about the possibility of playing in front of people one day and felt a quiet determination building inside her. Little did she know that her chance would come that very day, in a way she could not have imagined. The piano, silent for so long in the corner of the restaurant, was about to become the stage for a moment that would change her life, if only she could find the courage to take it. The restaurant had grown quieter after the lunch rush, with only a few patrons lingering over their drinks and desserts. The waitress was moving between tables with a calm efficiency, clearing empty cups and chatting briefly with the remaining customers. She felt a quiet relief after the hectic hours earlier, but a small part of her attention kept drifting to the piano in the corner. The keys seemed to glimmer softly under the afternoon light, almost calling to her, and she couldn't help imagining what it would feel like to play. It was then that he arrived. A man with an air of quiet authority walked in, his shoes clicking against the polished floor. He was well-dressed, not in a flashy way, but in a manner that suggested he was used to being noticed. People glanced at him as he passed, sensing that he was someone important. He did not rush, but moved with a steady, confident pace, scanning the restaurant with a calm interest. The waitress noticed him immediately, not because he demanded attention, but because there was something different in the way he carried himself. He walked to a table near the piano and sat down, placing a leather briefcase carefully beside him. He glanced around, taking in the room, the other customers, and finally his eyes landed on the piano. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as if he were remembering something from long ago. Then he looked up and caught the waitress's gaze. There was a small smile on his face, a gentle, expectant expression that made her heart beat faster. When she approached his table to take his order, he did something unexpected. Instead of asking for a drink or food first, he asked, "Would you play something for me on the piano?" The question caught her completely off guard. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "I see that piano over there," he said, nodding toward the corner of the restaurant. "I'd love to hear someone play. Would you?" She felt a sudden rush of emotions. Surprise, fear, and something else. Something like excitement mixed with disbelief. She had never performed in front of anyone outside of her small apartment. She had played for herself, for the night, for the quiet moments when no one was watching. But here, in a restaurant full of people, with someone clearly expecting her to perform, the idea seemed both thrilling and terrifying. She shook her head slightly, trying to keep her composure. I don't know," she stammered. "I'm just a waitress. I don't usually—" She trailed off, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her apron as she looked down at the floor, suddenly very aware of the eyes that might be on her. The man's smile did not fade. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, patient. "I'm not asking for a concert," he said gently. "Just a song, something you like. I think it would make this place feel even warmer." She swallowed hard. Her mind raced, listing all the reasons she shouldn't do it. What if she made a mistake? What if the customers laughed? What if she embarrassed herself? And yet, beneath the fear, there was a tiny spark of hope, a whisper that told her this might be her moment, the chance to let her music be heard. Even if just for a short while, she nodded slowly, her fingers brushing against her apron nervously. "Okay," she said quietly. I can try." The man's smile widened just slightly, a nod of encouragement. "Thank you," he said simply, as if that were enough to reassure her. She walked over to the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. The room seemed to quiet down, though the other customers continued their conversations. They seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. She hesitated for a moment before sitting down on the bench. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a brief second, and tried to calm herself. She began with a soft note, testing the sound, feeling the texture of the keys beneath her fingertips. The sound was familiar, comforting, and it reminded her of quiet evenings at home, of practicing late into the night, of losing herself in the music. She continued, letting her fingers move naturally, guided by memory and instinct rather than conscious thought. The first few notes were tentative, but soon she felt the melody flow, gentle and steady, filling the small corner of the restaurant with warmth. The man listened quietly, his eyes focused on her, but not in a judgmental way. He seemed to be savoring each note, appreciating the music as if it were a gift. Some of the other customers began to notice, turning slightly in their seats, curious about the sound. The piano's voice was soft but clear, weaving through the chatter, drawing attention without demanding it. As she continued, her nervousness began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. She remembered songs she had practiced countless times, little pieces she had played in her apartment, songs that made her heart feel light and her mind feel free. Her fingers moved more smoothly, and the music began to fill the space, not just in sound but in feeling. There was a connection forming between her and the listeners, an unspoken understanding that this moment was special. The wealthy guest leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table, his eyes watching her with a kind of quiet admiration. He did not speak, did not interrupt, but the way he listened made her feel as if her music truly mattered. It was not just a performance. It was a bridge between her world and the world of the people around her. She noticed a few of the other patrons stopping their conversations, their heads turning toward the piano, curiosity in their eyes. The sound was gentle but commanding, enough to make them pause and listen, enough to create a small circle of attention around her without disturbing the flow of the restaurant. She felt a strange mix of pride and humility, knowing that this moment was fleeting but meaningful. Her mind drifted back to her past, to all the years she had practiced in secret, to the evenings spent playing for no one but herself. She realized that all those quiet moments had led to this one, that every mistake, every triumph, every late night at the keyboard had prepared her for a time when someone else could hear her. The thought was overwhelming, almost too much to bear, but she pushed it aside and focused on the music. The song she played was one of her favorites, a piece that had always lifted her spirits and made her feel alive. She allowed herself to feel every note, every pause, every gentle rise and fall. She lost herself in the music, and for the first time in a long while, she forgot the worries of her day, the tiredness of her job, and the small insecurities that had always whispered in the back of her mind. For these few minutes, she existed only in the music and the connection it created. When she finally finished, there was a brief silence, a pause that seemed to stretch just long enough for everyone to register what had happened. Then the wealthy guest clapped softly, a warm smile on his face. "That was beautiful," he said simply, as if those two words could capture the feeling she had created. She felt her cheeks flush, a mixture of relief and joy washing over her. The fear that had gripped her earlier melted into something lighter, a sense of accomplishment and quiet pride. She looked around the room and noticed the expressions of the other patrons, some surprised, some delighted, some quietly appreciative. It was a small moment of recognition, but it meant more to her than words could express. The man reached into his pocket and left a generous tip on the table, more than enough to cover his meal. He gave her a nod of respect, not the kind that demanded gratitude, but the kind that recognized effort and talent. "Thank you for sharing your music," he said. "It really made this afternoon special." She nodded, still catching her breath, her fingers lingering over the keys for a moment longer. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady this time. I'm glad you liked it." After he left, the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, but something had changed. She noticed a subtle shift in the way people looked at her, a sense of appreciation that went beyond her work as a waitress. The music had connected them to her in a way that words never could. She realized that this small act, this moment of courage, had made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in years. She sat back for a moment, reflecting on what had just happened. The piano, once a silent companion, had become a bridge to the world outside her private life. She had taken a risk, and it had paid off not just in recognition but in a renewed sense of confidence. She thought about the years she had spent hiding her talent, and for the first time, she wondered why she had waited so long to let it be known. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, but the memory of that song lingered. Every time she glanced at the piano, she remembered the sound of the keys beneath her fingers, the warmth of the listener's eyes, and the feeling of connection that had filled the room. It was a reminder that sometimes, the smallest moments could have the greatest impact, and that courage, even in tiny doses, could change the way she saw herself and the world around her. As the day drew to a close, she prepared for the evening crowd with a new sense of purpose. The piano no longer felt like a distant dream. It was a part of her life that she could bring into the open. She knew that opportunities might not come every day, but the memory of this one would stay with her forever, a quiet but powerful reminder of what was possible when she allowed herself to take a chance. The restaurant had returned to its usual rhythm, but the atmosphere felt subtly different. A quiet energy lingered, as if the music from the piano had left an invisible trace in the air. The waitress moved between tables with her usual care, refilling drinks, clearing plates, and answering questions with a polite smile. But inside, her thoughts kept drifting back to the piano and the song she had just played. The memory of the notes, the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, and the warmth of the listener's eyes stayed with her, lingering like a gentle echo she couldn't shake. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of confidence. It was small, almost fragile, but it was there, and it gave her a sense of possibility she had rarely experienced. She had always known she could play, but performing in front of someone who truly appreciated her music had changed something. It was as if she had discovered a hidden strength, a courage that had been waiting for the right moment to appear. As she continued her work, she noticed subtle changes in the way people looked at her. A few customers smiled more warmly, some offered extra thanks, and a couple even glanced at the piano with a hint of curiosity, as if wondering whether the music might start again. It was a small thing, but it mattered. It made her feel seen not just as a waitress, but as a person with a talent, a person with a story that could touch others. Her coworkers noticed it too. One of them, who usually joked and teased, gave her a quiet nod of approval when she passed. Another whispered, "You sounded amazing. I didn't know you could play like that." She smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. It was strange to hear such praise for something she had always considered private, almost secret. She had practiced alone for so long, never imagining that anyone outside her apartment would ever hear her play. The wealthy guest's visit had left a lasting impression on her, not just because of his presence, but because of the encouragement he had given. His simple words, his gentle smile, and the way he had listened without judgment had made her realize that her music had value, that it could create something meaningful beyond her own enjoyment. She thought about how easy it was to hide her talents, to let fear and self-doubt keep her from sharing them, and how small acts of courage could open doors she had never even imagined. As the afternoon turned into evening, more customers arrived. Some were regulars, familiar faces who came week after week, while others were new, exploring the restaurant for the first time. She served them all with the same care, but now there was a quiet confidence in the way she moved, a subtle lightness in her step. She was still a waitress, still performing the daily tasks of cleaning, serving, and smiling, but there was an added dimension to her presence, a sense of someone who had touched something larger than herself, if only for a brief moment. A small group of customers, who had been quietly observing the piano, finally spoke up. "Do you play often?" one of them asked, curiosity in their voice. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Not really," she admitted. "Mostly at home for myself. I haven't performed much in public." The group exchanged impressed looks. "That was beautiful," one of them said. "You should play more often. It really brightened the room." Their words warmed her in a way that nothing else could. She realized that sharing her music even briefly had an impact. People responded not just to the sound, but to the emotion, the care, and the courage it represented. For the rest of the evening, she found herself glancing at the piano more often. She imagined playing again, trying different pieces, feeling the music flow through her fingers. The fear was still there, but it had softened, replaced by anticipation and curiosity. What would it feel like to play regularly in public? Could her music become more than just a private escape? The questions filled her mind, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt a quiet determination. As the restaurant grew busier with dinner customers, she focused on her work while keeping the piano in the corner of her awareness. She noticed a few patrons who seemed particularly interested, some even lingering near the entrance to watch and listen. The thought made her heart race slightly, but it was no longer fear that controlled her. It was a mix of excitement and possibility. She realized that she had crossed an invisible line, stepping from private practice into public recognition, and it felt both exhilarating and liberating. During a brief lull, she allowed herself a moment to rest and reflect. She thought about all the times she had played alone, the late nights and quiet mornings, the hours spent perfecting each note. She remembered the joy it had always brought her, the way music could transport her beyond her small apartment, beyond the daily grind, into a world of sound and feeling. And now, for the first time, she had shared that world with others, and they had responded with warmth and appreciation. The thought filled her with a quiet pride. She had taken a risk, and it had paid off, not in money or fame, but in something far more valuable, the recognition that her talent mattered, that her music could touch others. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to her. She realized that she had underestimated herself, that she had allowed fear to hold her back for far too long. Now, she felt a shift, subtle but undeniable, as if a door had been opened to a new chapter in her life. The evening continued, with the restaurant gradually emptying as the night grew late. She moved between tables, cleared dishes, and prepared for closing, but her mind kept returning to the piano. She thought about the wealthy guest, the brief but meaningful encouragement he had given, and the small crowd that had noticed her music. Each of these moments reinforced the feeling that her talent had value beyond her own enjoyment, that it could create connections and inspire others in ways she had never imagined. She imagined what it would feel like to play for more people, to allow her music to become part of their lives, even in small ways. The thought was both thrilling and daunting. She knew that performing publicly would bring new challenges, fear, mistakes, and judgment. But she also knew that the potential rewards, the sense of connection and fulfillment, were worth it. The seed of possibility had been planted, and she felt it growing quietly inside her, waiting for the right time to blossom. Later, as she wiped down the tables for the last time and prepared to leave, she glanced once more at the piano. The keys seemed to shine softly under the dim lights, inviting her, urging her to play again. She reached out and touched them gently, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers. For a moment, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine the sound of music filling the room, the way it could make people pause, listen, and feel. She thought about the wealthy guest's words, his calm encouragement, and the way he had listened without judgment. It occurred to her that sometimes all it took was a single person to recognize a talent, to give someone the confidence to step forward. That small act of belief had changed the entire afternoon, had transformed her fear into courage, and had opened a door to something new. She realized that she wanted to explore that door, to see where it might lead, and to allow her music to become part of the world outside her private life. As she left the restaurant and stepped into the cool night air, she felt a sense of quiet exhilaration. The city around her seemed alive with possibility, the streets and buildings illuminated by streetlights that made everything feel magical in a small, simple way. She walked slowly, her thoughts still on the piano, on the music, and on the moments she had shared with the patrons. The memory of their faces, the warmth of their smiles, and the appreciation in their eyes stayed with her, a reminder of what courage and talent could achieve. That night, she sat at her small apartment window, looking out at the city lights, and allowed herself to play. The keys of her keyboard felt familiar, comforting, and she let the music flow without hesitation or fear. She thought about the restaurant, the wealthy guest, and the small audience that had listened with open hearts. She realized that she had crossed a threshold, that her music had found its way into the world, and that she could no longer hide it away. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of freedom, a quiet joy that filled her completely. She knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and fear, but she also knew that she had the courage to face them. The piano was no longer just a part of her private life. It had become a bridge, a way to connect with others and to share a piece of herself. She felt a deep gratitude for the opportunity, for the encouragement, and for the small but powerful moment that had sparked this change. She ended the night with a smile, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The music had become part of her life in a way that was real, tangible, and transformative. She knew that tomorrow would bring its own challenges and responsibilities, but she also knew that she had discovered something enduring, a courage to share her gift, a belief in herself, and the realization that her music could touch others in ways she had never imagined. The next day, The restaurant buzzed with its usual activity, but the atmosphere felt different for her. The memory of yesterday's performance was still fresh, and the warmth it had brought lingered in her heart. She moved among the tables with a lightness in her step, greeting customers with a smile that felt a little brighter than usual. Her co-workers noticed it too, whispering quietly as she passed, some smiling knowingly. She had a secret now, one that filled her with quiet pride, and it made even the smallest tasks feel lighter. During the morning shift, a few of the patrons from the previous day returned. One of them, a middle-aged woman, waved at her as she walked by. "I loved your music yesterday," the woman said softly. "It really made the afternoon special. You should play more often." The words brought a warm flush to her cheeks. She nodded politely, feeling her chest swell with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. She had never imagined that her playing could leave such an impression, even on people she barely knew. She carried on with her work, but her thoughts kept drifting to the piano. The idea of playing again was tempting, but fear still lingered. What if the music didn't feel as right this time? What if the audience didn't respond? She tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing on clearing tables and refilling drinks. But each glance at the piano reminded her of yesterday's small victory, and the courage it had taken to sit down and play. By late morning, the wealthy guest from the previous day returned. He entered the restaurant quietly, his presence immediately noticeable. He walked toward the table by the piano and sat down, giving her a small nod of greeting. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but it was accompanied now by a quiet confidence. Yesterday had shown her that she could do more than she thought. When she approached him, he smiled. "I hope you don't mind," he said, "but I was hoping to hear you play again." His tone was gentle, encouraging, not demanding. She hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. I can," she said quietly, her voice steadier than she expected. She walked toward the piano, each step feeling lighter than it had the day before. She sat down on the bench and let her hands hover over the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingertips. This time, she was not just nervous. She was excited. She remembered the way the notes had flowed yesterday, the warmth of the listener's appreciation, and the feeling of connection that had filled the room. She wanted to experience it again, and she wanted others to feel it too. As she began to play, the melody filled the room, gentle at first, then gradually more confident. The wealthy guest listened quietly as before, but this time she noticed a small group of other customers slowly turning toward the piano, drawn by the sound. Their curiosity and appreciation added to her confidence, and she let the music flow freely, feeling each note with intention and care. The restaurant seemed to change around her. Conversations quieted, glasses clinked less loudly, and even the servers moved with a little more care, aware of the music filling the space. Her fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence, and she felt a deep satisfaction in the way the melody wrapped around the room. Each note seemed to carry a little piece of her heart, and she realized that sharing it made her feel more alive than she had in years. When she finished, the applause was small but heartfelt. The wealthy guest leaned forward, smiling warmly. "That was beautiful," he said simply. "You have a real gift. Don't let it stay hidden." She nodded, feeling a deep warmth spread through her chest. His words resonated with something she had long known but rarely allowed herself to embrace. That her music had value, and that sharing it could bring joy not just to herself, but to others. Word of her performance began to spread quietly through the restaurant. A few patrons returned later in the day, asking if she might play again. Some left notes or small tips, expressing their appreciation in words that felt genuine and heartfelt. Each gesture, no matter how small, reinforced the sense that her music mattered, that it could touch people in ways her daily work alone never had. By mid-afternoon, the restaurant manager approached her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. "I've heard from a few customers," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "They mentioned your piano playing. I didn't realize you could do that. Maybe we could have a small performance in the evenings? Some people might really enjoy it." She blinked, a little overwhelmed, but the idea stirred something inside her. The thought of playing more regularly, of letting her music become a part of the restaurant's atmosphere, filled her with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. She agreed quietly, feeling a sense of responsibility alongside her excitement. This was more than a simple hobby now. It was a chance to share something personal with the world, to bring moments of beauty to people's everyday lives. She spent the next few hours imagining pieces she could play, thinking about the melodies that had always filled her apartment, and wondering how they might sound to others in this new setting. As the day went on, she noticed that even coworkers who had once only seen her as a reliable waitress were looking at her differently. Some offered quiet encouragement, others smiled knowingly, and a few even asked if they could hear her play sometime. She realized that her music was changing the way people saw her, not just as someone who served food and drinks, but as a person with talent, depth, and something worth noticing. Later that evening, as the restaurant prepared to close, she sat at the piano for a final practice before heading home. The room was empty except for a few lingering customers, but the sound of her music filled it completely. She allowed herself to play without worry, without hesitation, letting the melody flow naturally. Each note reminded her of the courage it had taken to sit down and perform for the first time, and each pause brought a sense of peace she had rarely experienced in the busy, demanding world of the restaurant. After she finished, she lingered for a moment, touching the keys lightly and closing her eyes. The music had become more than just a pastime. It was a bridge to the world outside her private life, a way to connect with people she might never have met otherwise. She thought about the wealthy guest, the patrons who had listened, and the small but growing recognition she had begun to receive. The realization filled her with quiet gratitude and a sense of possibility. When she finally left the restaurant, the cool night air welcomed her. She walked slowly, her mind still replaying the music, thinking about the new opportunities that might come. The city around her seemed alive with potential, each light and shadow a reminder that the world was larger than her daily routine, that her talent could reach beyond the walls of the restaurant if she chose to let it. That night, she sat by her window at home and played again, letting her fingers move freely across the keys. The notes filled her small apartment, echoing off the walls, carrying the joy and courage she had discovered during the day. She thought about the people who had heard her music, the small moments of connection she had created, and the encouragement she had received. It was a reminder that her talent, once hidden and private, could bring happiness and inspiration to others. As the weeks passed, her performances became a regular part of the restaurant's atmosphere. Even small moments, like a brief melody while refilling a customer's coffee, brought smiles and quiet appreciation. She noticed a change not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. She felt more confident, more willing to take risks, and more certain that her music could have a lasting impact. One evening, after a particularly lively performance, the wealthy guest returned once more. He nodded at her, smiling, and left a note of encouragement. It read simply, "Keep playing. Your music is a gift." She held the note in her hands, feeling a sense of pride and gratitude that words could barely capture. It was a confirmation of what she had begun to realize, that her music mattered, that her courage had opened doors, and that the small steps she had taken could lead to something far greater. From that point forward, she embraced the piano as more than a private passion. She began to plan small performances, choosing songs that would resonate with the customers, experimenting with melodies that brought comfort, joy, or quiet reflection. Each note she played carried a piece of her heart, a reflection of the courage it had taken to share her music, and a promise to herself that she would continue to step beyond fear. Her life, once defined by routine and the quiet hum of daily responsibilities, had begun to change. The restaurant became not just a place to work, but a place where she could connect with others through music. She realized that her talent was not just a personal escape, but a way to create moments of beauty in the lives of people who might need them more than they realized. The transformation was subtle at first, but it was undeniable. She understood that this was only the beginning. The courage she had discovered, the recognition she had received, and the joy of sharing her music were all part of a journey that could lead to even greater possibilities. She did not know where it would end, but for the first time, she felt confident in the knowledge that she could face whatever came next, and that her music would guide her along the way. Weeks passed, and the restaurant had settled into a new rhythm. The piano had become more than just a piece of furniture in the corner. It was a part of the atmosphere, a gentle reminder of beauty and possibility in the middle of the busy, everyday life. The waitress had grown more confident with each performance. She no longer hesitated when someone requested a song, nor did she shy away from the occasional curious audience that gathered to listen. The small moments of music had started to feel like a natural part of her day, a bridge between her private passion and the wider world. One busy evening, a few new customers arrived. They were casually dressed, laughing softly as they made their way to a table near the piano. Their attention was drawn immediately to her as she walked by, and one of them whispered to the other, "Did she play here yesterday? I heard someone say the piano is amazing." She caught their eyes and smiled politely, a small thrill of anticipation running through her. She knew exactly what they meant. The piano sat in the corner, silent for a moment, as she approached. The restaurant's chatter quieted instinctively as she sat down and placed her fingers lightly on the keys. She paused, taking a breath, and then began to play. The first notes were gentle, hesitant, just as they had been in the past, but soon the music flowed naturally. Her fingers moved with a confidence she had never known before, guided by years of practice and the courage she had discovered over the last few weeks. The new customers listened quietly, eyes wide with appreciation. Others in the restaurant turned toward her as well, curious about the sound that had caught their attention. The wealthy guest had long since returned home, but she thought of him briefly, remembering the encouragement he had given, the way he had believed in her when she had doubted herself. His faith in her had sparked something that now grew stronger with each performance, and she felt a quiet sense of gratitude. By the time she finished the song, the room was filled with applause. It was not a loud, overwhelming sound, but warm and genuine, coming from people who had stopped to listen and truly appreciated the music. She smiled, feeling the familiar rush of pride mixed with humility. Every note she played carried a piece of her heart, and the response reminded her that sharing her music was no longer a terrifying risk. It was a joy. As the evening went on, she continued to play at intervals, selecting melodies that matched the mood of the room. Sometimes gentle and reflective, sometimes lively and uplifting. Each song seemed to touch the people around her in subtle ways. She noticed a little girl watching her with wide eyes, a young couple leaning closer to hear the music, and even a few older patrons who closed their eyes, letting the sound fill their thoughts. It was a quiet but powerful connection, one that made the routine of the restaurant feel extraordinary. After closing, she remained behind to clean and prepare for the next day. The piano was silent once more, but its presence was comforting, a reminder of what she had accomplished. She sat on the bench for a moment, touching the keys lightly, feeling the smoothness beneath her fingers. The journey she had started weeks ago, the small step of playing for a single guest, had transformed into something larger, something she could no longer ignore. Music had become a part of her life, a presence that brought joy not only to herself but to those around her. In the following days, she began to experiment more boldly. She tried new pieces, explored different rhythms, and even improvised melodies based on the energy of the room. She noticed that customers began to arrive earlier, sometimes specifically asking if she would be playing. A few regulars brought friends, curious to experience the music for themselves. Each performance strengthened her confidence and made her more comfortable with the idea that her music could be a small but meaningful gift to the world. Her co-workers also began to see her differently. The teasing that had once marked their interactions softened into respect and genuine admiration. Some of them asked questions about the songs she played, wanting to learn more, and a few even admitted that they felt inspired by her courage. The restaurant itself felt warmer, fuller, alive in a way it hadn't been before. Music had a way of changing people, and she saw that effect firsthand, in smiles, attentive faces, and subtle gestures of appreciation. One afternoon, a local music teacher happened to be dining at the restaurant. They stopped to listen, clearly impressed by her skill. After the performance, the teacher approached her with an idea. "You have real talent," they said. "Have you ever considered performing at a local event or even teaching others? People would love to hear you." She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness at the suggestion. Performing beyond the restaurant had never been something she dared to consider, yet the thought sparked a curiosity she could not ignore. The next few weeks became a delicate balance. She continued her work as a waitress, but now her role included the piano in a meaningful way. Each day brought new opportunities. A small crowd to listen, a chance to experiment with new songs, and moments of recognition that were quiet but deeply rewarding. She began to notice that music gave her a sense of control over her own life, a feeling that she had rarely experienced in the routine of work and responsibility. At home, she practiced more intentionally, exploring pieces she had once only played for herself. She wrote down melodies that came to her, experimented with harmonies, and allowed herself to dream. The piano became a source of growth, of personal discovery, and a reminder that her talents could expand beyond what she had once imagined. Each night, she felt more confident in her own voice, more willing to step into the unknown, and more certain that her music had a place in the world. One evening, as she closed the restaurant, she reflected on how far she had come. The moment she had sat at the piano for the wealthy guest had seemed small at the time, almost accidental, but it had led to a profound transformation. Her fear had given way to courage, her private talent had become a public gift, and her quiet confidence had grown into something she could carry into all aspects of her life. She realized that sometimes, a single act of bravery could set off a chain of events that changed everything. Even the customers who had initially come for a simple meal began to see her as more than a waitress. They recognized her skill, her passion, and her willingness to share something personal. The connection created by music was subtle but powerful, reminding her that human interaction could take many forms. She felt grateful for the chance to make a difference, even in small ways, in the lives of those who paused to listen. As the weeks turned into months, she began to dream even bigger. She thought about performing at community events, collaborating with other musicians, and perhaps even recording her own music someday. The idea no longer seemed impossible. The courage she had discovered in that first performance had opened a door, and now she was ready to explore the possibilities beyond it. One quiet evening, after the restaurant had emptied and she was alone with the piano, she played a new piece she had been working on. The melody was soft and reflective at first, then grew more confident, rising and falling like waves. She felt every note with intention, every chord carrying the memory of her journey. The fear, the risk, the applause, and the quiet moments of discovery. When she finished, she sat back on the bench, letting the silence fill the room. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. She had come a long way, and yet the journey was only beginning. She realized that her music was not just about playing notes on a piano. It was about connection, courage, and the willingness to step beyond fear. Every time she shared a song, she was offering a piece of herself, and in return, she received a gift that could not be measured in money or praise alone. It was the gift of feeling alive, of making a small but meaningful difference in the lives of others, and of discovering her own strength in the process. The piano, once a silent companion in the corner of the restaurant, had become a symbol of possibility. It reminded her that talent, when nurtured and shared, could create change, not just for herself, but for everyone who took the time to listen. She felt a quiet determination to continue, to explore new songs, to take more risks, and to embrace the unknown with courage. Her life had changed in ways she could not have predicted. What had started as a simple act of courage, playing a song for a single wealthy guest, had blossomed into a journey of self-discovery, confidence, and connection. She had learned that her talent was not something to hide, that sharing it could bring joy, and that small moments of bravery could lead to profound transformation. As she closed the restaurant one last time that evening, she looked around the room with a sense of gratitude and hope. The piano stood silently in the corner, waiting for the next opportunity, the next chance to fill the space with music. She knew that her journey was far from over, but she felt ready for whatever came next. She had discovered her voice, her courage, and her place in the world. She stepped out into the night, the cool air brushing against her face, and felt a sense of possibility stretching before her. She knew there would be challenges, moments of doubt, and times when fear might return. But she also knew that she had found something enduring, something that would guide her through the uncertainties of life and remind her that courage, when combined with passion, could open doors she had never imagined. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a reminder of her journey, her growth, and the power of sharing one's true self. She walked home with a smile, her heart light and her mind full of melodies yet to be discovered. The music would continue, the performances would continue, and she would continue to grow, each day adding a new note to the story she had begun with courage, curiosity, and a single song played in a quiet restaurant. Her life had shifted in ways that were subtle yet profound. She had discovered the power of sharing her gift, the joy of touching lives with something personal, and the courage to step beyond fear. And she knew that this was only the beginning. The piano, the music, and her own determination would continue to shape her world, opening doors to opportunities she had never imagined and creating moments of beauty in the lives of those who paused to listen. She sat at the piano one last time that night, letting her fingers move freely, exploring new melodies, and savoring the quiet triumph of what she had achieved. The music filled the room, soft and warm, carrying with it the story of courage, discovery, and connection. She closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, knowing that she had found something rare and beautiful, a way to bring joy to others while honoring her own heart. And in that moment she felt complete, not because she had achieved fame or fortune, but because she had found her voice, shared her gift, and embraced the possibilities that courage and passion could create. The journey would continue, but she had taken the first steps, and that was enough to change everything.